This session is about how to overcome financial difficulties, but more specifically, what to do if you've found yourself or you're about to get into financial difficulties in relation to paying your mortgage. If you have a mortgage and you cannot at present, due to whatever circumstances, due to whatever reasons, you cannot continue to make the commitments to paying your loans or your mortgage, what do you do? I know for many people, buying a home is one of the most daunting experiences. It's mentally challenging, it's emotionally challenging, and for a lot of people, sometimes we run into situations that are unforeseen, that we never knew would happen. And sometimes that goes as far as not being able to make a mortgage payment. That might come as a result of a loss of a job. It might come as a result of perhaps money owed to other vendors, other institutions, perhaps other debt commitments you have. That might come as a result of perhaps you've lost a loved one. Maybe you were cohabiting, or you had a spouse who was the breadwinner and the person is either left or the person is no more. I don't really know what the reason might be. I don't need to know what the reason might be. I think anyone in this particular situation, what you really want right now is a solution. And so what I like to do is share some of my experience in how to handle this. I'm not saying it's going to be right for you. I'm not providing financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor, but I do have some knowledge and experience about investing and wealth and how to deal with personal finance. The first thing that I would say is, if you found yourself in that position, I want you to recognize and realize that it's not a problem. It's a symptom of a problem. I'll say that again. If you find yourself in a position whereby you cannot pay your mortgage, you're in debt, the inability to pay your mortgage commitments or to get out of debt is not a problem. It's a symptom of an underlying problem. I believe that underlying problem comes in maybe 3 strategic areas. One of them particularly is a lack of financial wisdom. I'm not going to go into the detail. I'm not going to go into dealing with the past. What I want to focus on right now is give you solutions. My father was an exceptional human being, an exceptional man, love him dearly. But one of the things I learned from my dad growing up was, if there was a problem that arose, or he found that we, for whatever reason, got into, he dealt with the problem immediately. Then he focused on the cause later on. And that's what I want to do with you. I'd like to be able to get you to a place where your philosophy, your attitude, your strategy, your approach towards personal finance is what I would say of high value and esteem. But that's not what I want to deal with now. I like to just deal with how I can help you. So if you find yourself in any of those positions, either you're in debt and you can't make your mortgage payments, or you can't make your mortgage payments because you don't have enough income coming in to satisfy that expense that is needed, here is what I'll suggest you do. There are 2 options you have. The first option is where you effectively go back to the building society, or go to the bank, or go to your lenders, and you tell them what the present situation is. The second option is where you try to manage it yourself. I'll deal with both. I'll start with the latter. The latter being wanting to manage it yourself. And part of the reason you might want to manage this yourself is maybe because you have pride, maybe because you don't want it to affect your credit rating, maybe because you don't want to even invite scrutiny into your private life. You don't want the information being made public. You want to keep it to yourself. Maybe you know within yourself that this is a phase. a short phase, maybe 6 months or 3 months or 12 months, and you know within yourself that you can get yourself back on track, you might want to consider this option. The first strategy, and perhaps the only strategy I will give you, although I might give you one or two more, but I want to just give you one particular strategy. But the first strategy that you can consider is this. When you have a mortgage, it's a commitment. Effectively, it's a commitment between you and another party. You've committed, and let's use this as a good example. Let's say you've committed to a mortgage for maybe £200,000. I don't know what the local currency might be where you're listening from, but that doesn't matter. But let's use the 200,000 as a base figure. Let's assume from the £200,000 that you've taken as a loan that there's an interest. Let's assume that when you took out the loan, that you had agreed, because this is your home and you live in the home, that you were going to be making a certain payment. And let's assume that that payment amount is, say, £750. And that covers everything. And you've been making that payment regularly, but for some reason you can't make the payment now. Here are two options. Number one, the first option is you can remain in the house. And let's assume this house is maybe a 3-bedroom house. And let's assume you have kids, but it's a 3-bedroom house. You can make a decision to be humble, swallow your pride, and make a decision to lease or rent out one of the rooms. Let's assume in this particular instance, out of the 750 you need, you're only able to come up with 500. You can choose to rent out one room. By renting out one room, you can generate some income. Now, in the UK, I don't know what the laws and the tax laws might be in the countries you're listening from, but in the UK, there is an allowance that is normally provided for people who have made a decision to sublet part of their homes, and if they live in that particular home itself. That amount is something in the region of about 4,250. Well, it used to be 4,250. You might just need to check, but it's a tax deductible. Effectively, is the amount that you can earn tax-free per year without paying any taxes. So, for example, if you rented out that room for £250, it would mean in an entire year you can generate out of the 250 per month by the end of the year, if it's a 12-month period, which is what you need to get yourself back on track, you can make probably more than 3,000. And that 250 may not include bills. Let's assume you include bills and you say it's maybe 300. Then across 12 months, you can raise about 3,500. So that extra 250 can cover you. And you can add that to the 500 that you have, and you can make your payments. Perfectly legal. And that would mean you can stay where you are. You simply have to share part of your home with a guest. They will become what we call lodgers or flatmates, depending on the layout of your flat. You can structure it in such a way that if you would prefer that they don't have access to all parts of the house, maybe you can put within the room you rent, maybe make it an ensuite room. There's a bathroom, and you can put a small kitchenette where they can even make meals, so that they're not really sharing the main living room and kitchen with you. But there's something you can do. But remember what I said. You have to be humble. You have to be willing to live in some level of discomfort for a short period. That's the first option. I said I was going to give you one. I'm tempted to give you another one, and I will. I think it's important. The second option is that you make a decision. And if you say to yourself, well, I'm in a mess. I'm in a mess. And let's assume you do have a family. Let's assume you have maybe 2 kids. You can make a decision that rather than losing your home, let's assume also that perhaps you bought this home maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and therefore the capital gains, the appreciation on the property has gone up. And in the period, the home that you bought, or let's assume that the home, you took a loan from the bank for 200,000, maybe you put down some little deposit, and let's say the overall amount was 250,000 for purchasing the home. In the period that you've lived there, the home has appreciated to, let's say, 350,000. So you now have an additional equity of 100,000. On that basis, because you have some equity, much more than the original investment you put in, one of the things you can do is, rather than allow your home to be repossessed, because the way it works, the banks, when they go to repossessions, the bank is not looking out for your best interest. The bank is looking out for its best interest. If it goes to auction, in many cases, because you're dealing with sophisticated buyers, it's almost a, I won't call it a zero-sum game, but when it comes to investing, there's something you must recognize. The market is efficient to the point that wherever you have a buyer and a seller, one person is trying to buy at the lowest price, the other is trying to buy at the sell at the highest price. One of you certainly will be at an advantage. It's not an equal opportunity game. One person will be at an advantage. So most sophisticated buyers buying repossessed homes or foreclosures come with this mindset that they want to buy it at the cheapest level because they know you're in financial difficulty. The bank at that point in time is trying to sell it, and the bank is only thinking about getting back their original loan. They're not really bothered about you. If the bank can sell it for much higher, then they'll get their loan back and they'll give you back whatever equity is left. But they don't really care about protecting your equity. All they care about is getting their loan back because you violated the terms of the loan. One way you can avoid going down that path is to make a difficult decision to say, I'm going to move out of my house and I'm going to let or lease my house for a period of, say, 12 months. Let's go back to the initial numbers we were using. Your mortgage is $750. If you were to rent out the entire house, a 3-bedroom house, you could rent out that entire house for £1,000, say £1,000. So you could make an extra $250 per month. Now, the first question you would ask is, where do I go to? Well, I'd like you to use your ingenuity and think. That could mean moving into friends, moving in with relatives. And I know it's very humbling, but what it means is that you protect the equity. Part of your net worth is protected. And you move in with loved ones. It's a temporary time. You make £250, and that £250, perhaps, who knows, you could actually pay that £250 towards contribution to who you've moved in with, or you can find maybe a 1-bedroom flat or a studio flat that is a little bit less than the $750 you were paying for your mortgage, and that is a little bit better for you to deal with. That's one option. So I would say consider the possibility of renting out your house and then moving to somewhere else where you can rent or where you can be allowed to stay for a short period. Now, if all you need is 6 months, you could perhaps go stay with someone who is a loved one who would understand. If you need 12 months, then you might want to find a place to rent, maybe a smaller house. This is what's quite useful. Rather than rent out your home as one effectively tenancy contract, you can become a little bit more creative. And by creative, what I mean is you have a 3-bedroom house. Rather than rent it out to one person, you can decide to do what we call multi-tenancy agreements. So if your house is positioned in a strategic locations where maybe there's a need for and a high demand for accommodation, if there are lots of jobs, or if there's a lot of institutions like education institutions, and so you have a lot of students, you can make a decision to sublet parts of the house. So you can convert each room into a tenancy contract. So effectively you're renting out to 3 people rather than just one person. Depending on the layout of the house, if the living room is separate from the kitchen area, you can even make the living room a habitable room. So you have 4 rooms and you have a kitchen or shared space, and the toilets and the hallway are shared. On that basis, rather than rent out the house for $1,000, it's possible that you might be able to get a rental agreement of about 400 per room, and that could include bills, or it may not include bills. So across 4 rooms, you're making about 1,600. Let's assume that you're making 1,600, excluding bills, net. You take the 1,600, you pay off the £750 mortgage you owe. That leaves you with a considerable sum of money, something in the region of about 850, which is incredible. With the 850 you have left, it's possible for you to find maybe a 1-bedroom flat that you can rent for something in the region of about 650. That leaves you with £200 left. So effectively, you're making money every month, net. So not only are you now outside and off being in a deficit position, you're now in a surplus position. You can then use that £200 constructively, maybe towards investing, maybe towards paying off any other debts you have. But what you have is the peace of mind that, number one, someone is paying off your mortgage, paying the expenses on the flats. Number two, the equity you've built up in the house is protected, and you get to participate in any appreciation going forward. Number three, you don't have to deal with the bank in terms of foreclosures or repossessions. Number four, you can save face and you can still be living comfortably. And number five, you'll be generating more in income than you ever imagined. Now, some might say, well, it may not be possible. What if the 3-bedroom couldn't be leased to 4 people? Well, let's say you could only lease it to 3 people, £400 each. That's 1,200. You pay the bank 750. That leaves you with 450, roughly. That includes, that's the total amount you get net. That doesn't include any bills. The tenants are paying for the bills. You take the 450. That 450 might just be enough. Maybe you might be short by £50 to get a 2-bedroom flat that you can rent for £500. So the point I'm making with this explanation or example is you've got to be a little bit more creative. You've got to think. You've got to think outside the box. It's not a one-way street. You have to think because you have a great mind. And usually I know when you have financial challenges, it's difficult to think creatively because you're worried. Now remember this, that worrying is the wrong use of the imagination. It's the wrong use of the mind. Your mind is there for one purpose only, and that is to create. Creativity is your true nature. So what I'd like you to do is go away and think about these 2 options and see whether it could work for you. Let's go to the next part, which is, let's assume that it's not something you want to deal with yourself, that you're in a really, really bad place. Number one, you can't go with the option I gave you by having maybe one of the rooms rented out whilst you live there. And number two, you cannot move out of the house and lease it out to someone else and find somewhere else for yourself. The last 2 options I'm going to give you are options that you can explore. These options will require participation and collaboration with your bank or your building society or the loan company or the mortgage lender. It will require participation with them. The last 2 options are quite interesting, but what it requires is you taking control of the situation and you communicating intelligently to the bank or the building society. I can promise you this, every bank, every building society dreads foreclosures. They dread having to repossess a home. And the reason is because when they give you a loan, they're hoping that for the 30 years you've signed up to, or the 25 years, or the 20 or 40 years you've signed up to, that they're going to be making interests every single month from you. That is their hope. The bank's responsibility is to loan money. The bank never wants to have money back. doesn't want to repossess the house because the bank doesn't like, well, the bank likes asset, but the bank doesn't like to be responsible for managing assets. And that's the reason why once you cannot make the payments, they sell the house immediately and they loan the money out to someone else. Now, the third option you have is you go to the bank. Before you call the bank, you sit down and you maybe make a detailed chronology of the way things are with you. I'll use an example. Let's say you've lost a job. And let's say you've been working for a period of, say, 10 or more years. At the moment you've been notified that you've lost a job, if the job you're working in perhaps have given you 2 months severance pay, it means that in 2 months you won't have any other income. You have a choice. You can go to the bank immediately if you really want to, and you can tell the bank, listen, I've just lost my job. I intend to find a new job within that period, but just in case I cannot find a job, I might have some difficulty. Therefore, I would like to ask for what I call a payment holiday. A payment holiday. Banks offer those. They don't tell you normally, but they offer those. A payment holiday is simply an agreement with the bank where the bank might say, we'll give you 3 months, we'll give you 6 months of a free period where you don't pay during those months. It doesn't mean that the bank gives you the money for free. What the bank will do is redistribute those 3 or 6 month payments further down the line. So at some point, you have to pay it back. But the bank understands. Most banks will only do this if they are comfortable that the equity you have in the house is far in excess of the risk involved. So, for example, I said you bought a house, you took a loan for £200,000. The property purchase price was $250,000. After a period of a number of years, the property is appreciated in value to about $350,000. So now you have, based on what you put in, you have more than in excess of $100,000 in equity. Now the bank is confident that if they have to repossess, at least they're going to get back $100,000 because you already have that equity in the house. The bank is then happy to give you a payment holiday of 3 months, 4 months, or 5 months, or 6 months. It's so simple, it's so easy. So I would recommend, if you must, you can go to the bank. You can ask the bank for a payment holiday. You must remember, though, at some point, the bank would ask you to pay back for that period. But it's a very, very sincere way of being honest and going to the bank and saying, I might have some difficulty. It could also be that perhaps this is not a case of you losing your job. Maybe you have a lot of debts and you just can't make the payments. Again, go to the bank. Now, remember that the bank wants to help you because the bank recognizes that if they have to go through foreclosures, it's very expensive. It's time consuming. During the period, they have to find a legal way, number one, to evict you from the house. That could take months to get a court order to get you out because the court would need demonstration from the bank, evidence from the bank that they've tried to support you, they've tried to help, and that you've tried as much as you can within reason to make your commitments. And that is a long process, and that is a difficult process. So imagine this goes on for 6 months, and in that 6 months period, you can't make payments. It means that the bank is not getting any interest during that period. Banks want to avoid that. Now, even if they're able to get a court order, they now have to go through the legal process of getting auctioneers and getting the properties listed, which means they have to pay someone to sell it. They pay a percentage fee, depending on who they sell it through. That fee could range in the high percentages. Now, think about this. A traditional agent to list your property might ask you to pay between, I don't know what it might be where you are, but they might ask you to pay a fee of between, say, 3% and 7%, depending on where you are. Likewise, if someone has to auction your house out, they're going to ask for a fee. Again, that means the bank is incurring extra expenses and it hasn't retrieved its original loan. It doesn't know whether the property will sell at a good price or less. Now, the bank also recognizes it has to get professionals involved, people to go and inspect the house, get the paperwork ready, and then get you out legally, and then put the property on the market, and get people to allow for access for inspections and viewings, and then finally when it's rented, they have to transfer the lease, get a solicitor involved, get the documents ready. The bank wants to avoid all of that because the cost is huge. The loss of revenue is huge. The loss in time is huge. It's a bad investment. So once you go to the bank and you ask for a payment holiday, the bank just sits down and you got to think about this logically. Just the same way you're talking or listening to me, and the same way I'm sharing with you, when you're dealing with a bank, you're dealing with people. These people have emotions and they have a heart. So they understand what it feels like to be in a difficult situation. They are businesses, so they have to be business-minded. And as a business person, they recognize that doing a deal with you is much better than trying to fight you. So I usually say to people, if you go to the bank and say, I'm going through a difficult time, the bank recognizes that if they put a lot of pressure on you, that it might break you. The kettle only boils when there is something, a water or content in it. You can't put pressure on someone who has no money. What you've got to do is allow them the freedom or the opportunity to go and actually find other means to make amends. So number 3 is a payment holiday. It works. It's beautiful. It's powerful. The bank is always willing to help you. So ask. The word is you have to ask. And when you call the bank, you've got to be professional. You've got to have evidence, either through spoken words or written or confirmation that you're doing everything you can to get out of your predicament, and that it's not simply an evidence or neglect on your part. Number 4. It's a little bit difficult and different, and I'll explain in this way. Most of us, when we sign up to having a mortgage or loan, we go for a period. It could be a 25-year period. It could be a 30-year period. In this case, you bought the house. You've been at the place for 5 years or more. If at the time you bought the house, it was your first home, maybe you took a 30-year mortgage. In that period, let's assume you haven't remortgaged. So you've gone past the initial stages. Effectively, you might have about 24, 25 years left. The third option, or rather the fourth option, is to extend the terms of the loan. Extend the terms of the loan. So you took out a 30-year loan. You're already 5 years into the loan. You go back to the bank and you say, listen, I'm having difficulty. I know you guys may not be able to give me a payment holiday, but what I'd like to do is reduce what I'm paying because I'm struggling. Maybe in your case, who knows, maybe you need an extra 30% reduction. So you go to the bank and you say, I'd like to extend the terms of my loan. It could be a temporary extension. The bank says, fine, we'll extend it back to 30 years. They might even say 35 years. In doing that, what they would like to look at is your age. They like to know how old you are, because if you're young, they know you have time to pay off. By extending your loan, it reduces your monthly payment. And it's a much better deal for the bank. So you can say to the bank, listen, it's a better deal for you. If you extend my loan up to 35 years, rather than pay £750 per month, that could drop down to £500 per month. Now, £500 per month could be all you can afford. It means that the bank extends the repayment agreement, which means that they make more interest overall. So it's a great advantage for the bank. It also helps you get through the temporary difficulty you're going through. Now, that could be permanent or that could be temporary. You can say, I want to do it for just 12 months. And once you overcome and get through that difficult financial crisis, you can go back to the bank and renegotiate and change it back to maybe a 25 or 20-year loan. But it's a simple way of reducing what you're paying. Remember, what you're trying to do is reduce, not completely eradicate, because it's a commitment on your part you've made, to reduce what you're paying, to give you the time to give you the support you need to go out and change your financial situation. So that's number 4. A very simple thing to do. I think it's probably worth considering, depending on your circumstances. So there are 4 things I've given you so far. I hope they've been useful. There's a 5th that I had in mind. I'm not necessarily sure, but it's, I thought about it before I started, and for some reason it doesn't come to mind right now, but it doesn't matter. Let me summarize the 4 of them. Number 1, I said you had 4 options. If you're having difficulty paying off your mortgage and you want some solutions, you have 4 options. And these are immediate solutions that can get you going. 4 options. I broke the options into 2 parts. The first 2, I said, these are options and strategies you can apply yourself without informing the bank, without getting the bank informed, without getting the banks concerned because they don't start panicking and worried as though you're going to default. The first option I said was, if you have a home and you have a room in your home, it might be a 3-bedroom house. That's the example I used. I said, why don't you rent out 1 room? Who knows? Why don't you rent out 2 rooms if you can, if you have the space and you can humble yourself and accommodate that temporary inconvenience. And with that, you can generate and raise enough money. In the UK, if you rented out a room, you're allowed to earn, the rule used to be you could earn up to about 4,250. Now is the exact number, tax-free. You don't have to pay taxes. So you can generate some money by renting out or leasing a part of your house and use that money to pay towards your mortgage. Just reduce the burden and the pressure on yourself. Number 2, I said, you can make a decision. Perhaps if the case is that you can't even afford any payment. It's not you have less, it's that you have none. You can make a decision to move out of the house. If the house has been there and you've owned it for more than 5 years and you've built up some equity, don't lose all the equity in the house. Lease the house out, move out, find a relative, find a friend, somewhere you can stay temporary, 6 months or 12 months, and you lease out the entire house. But be creative. If you lease out the house to one person, if the house is located in a good area of town where there are jobs, there is demand, maybe there's a lot of schools, so a lot of students, you can be creative, and rather than lease out to one person, you multi-lease. So you rent out each room. So rather than perhaps leasing out your house and making £1,000 from the house, which would mean you pay off the mortgage of $750, which is the example I used, you make $250 in profit. I said, why don't you lease out each room? If you were able to lease out the living room, assuming it's separate from the kitchen, you would be leasing out 4 rooms. At $400 each, that's £1,600. So you can afford to pay off your mortgage. That will leave you with £850, the example I used. You find a place for $500, maybe a 1-bedroom flat or 2-bedroom flat. You pay that, and it still leaves you about £250 spare cash.